All right, so we finished up talking about political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Now we're looking at linkage institutions. So a linkage institution, simply put, is just a something or a means or a medium that connects the people to government. So we're going to look at interest groups because interest groups connect the people to the government. PACs, political action committees, connect people to the government. Lobbying, which is uh, essentially certified attorneys or lawyers that push on political members in Congress, the House and the Senate, and the president, and the state level to get the laws they want or to stop the laws they don't want to happen. And finally, the big one, the media, which many people even call the fourth branch of government, because the media checks and balances can check or balance the government, but it could also create distortion and misunderstanding about the government. But it's a very big idea with many parts to it. So we're going to look at, first of all, interest groups. So let's start there. You see the media role in the middle, show elections, covering issues, presenting candidates' platform. It's a really great way. Their platform gets out to us because of the media. Interviewing candidates, that's the media letting us see that and getting to them. But so, how can you influence your political systems outside of a political party? Well, these are the many ways you could start. So let's start with interest groups. You see the top right-hand corner, probably some of the two most powerful, and actually I know the two largest interest groups are specifically uh, one's a union, the other one is a straight interest group. You have the National Rifle Association, and then you have the NEA, National Education Association, which is a teachers union. And then you have the UAW, United Auto Workers Union, which is auto workers that are unionized. And the AFL-CIO is a big union as well. So you have unions and National Rifle Association are some of the most powerful interest groups. The NRA is the biggest sponsor of the Republican Party today, while unions are the biggest supporters of the Democratic Party. An interest group is an organization of people sharing a common interest or goal that seeks to influence the making of public policy. So, an interest group could be good or bad based on your perspective and your bias, but simply put, it's just a group that's pushing on the government to get the policies they want. So, for example, if they're about the environment and they want a better environment or they want the government to restrict business destruction of the earth in America, you might see what's called the Sierra Nevada Club or Sierra Club, which is an interest group that lobbies for environmental reasons. Could be a vegan association if you don't believe in eating meat or animal products. It could be the opposite, though. It could be a meat company pact that are a group of people that are pro-meat and they want to spend money and push on the government. Like in Missouri, for example, we started to consider things that they lobbied to not allow certain things if they didn't have enough meat in them as not being meat. Well, that's because the meat producers wanted less competition. They didn't want them to take on that name, and it worked. In Missouri, we changed it, made laws that restrict calling something meat if it wasn't 100% meat. So there's two types of interest groups we're going to really examine. First one is institutional interest groups. Individuals or organizations that represent other organizations. For example, General Motors has interest groups, and Washington represents. There's over 500 of these firms since 1970 that have opened. Wow. Usually made up of small staff or lawyers and public relations staff. I just want you to think about that. It's sad to say, but in the politics and the interest groups pushing on the politics is so powerful that you'll see that companies are literally moving to Washington, D.C., and some people make the joke that maybe it's just to get closer to the lobbying. Otherwise, you have to have an office in Washington, D.C., so you can lobby and push on the government, the federal government, to make sure that they regulate or don't regulate your products in a way that benefits your company or your companies. So if you're like the meat industry or the gas company or the coal companies. So I think the gas industry or the oil companies are the most powerful companies in the world, right up there if it's with the tech companies. So tech might be a little bit more powerful now but gas had been the dominant giant for over 100 years. John D. Rockefeller was very powerful and would have used interest groups. Then you got membership interest groups, and that's the ones you guys probably think of a little bit more. So you think of these groups like the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So African American, very powerful African American, the probably most powerful African American organization. They do lobby. They meet with Democrats, maybe some Republicans, not many, but presidents will speak at their conferences, and they push on which Democrats going to get their sponsorship. So even if they never sponsor the opposite party like the Republicans, it means a lot to have the NAACP backing you. Otherwise, it might destroy a Democratic candidate. They might not get elected. If African Americans Association won't support them, then a lot of black people might turn away and not vote for that candidate. The National Rifle Association is super powerful, over 3 million members nationwide, and it's a dues-paying organization. And their main thing is to loosen as many gun laws as possible under the Second Amendment. And they interpret it as almost no restrictions at all. Then I talked about the Sierra Club, which again is an environmental organization. And they're a dues-paying organization. You spend money to join these organizations, actually be a part of them, and they use the money to push and lobby on the government to stop the environment, destruction of trees, or whatever interests they have, and how information is presented. It's in some ways to the government. They'll actually bring their lobbyists there. We'll talk about that later. So here's my question. Which of the following describes the fundamental difference between political parties and interest groups? Because they're not the same. Is it A, political parties are prohibited from sponsoring campaigning advertisements and interest groups are not? B, political parties represent broad arrays of issues, whereas interest groups are more likely to focus on narrow sets of issues? C, political parties are more likely to focus on national politics, whereas interest groups focus on local politics? D, political parties tend to have strength in particular regions, whereas the power of interest groups is more consistently across states? Or E, political parties are required to disclose their campaign finance activities, whereas interest groups are not? Take a second. So I hope you chose B. Political parties represent broad arrays of issues and many different types of issues, not just one interest or one single focused issue. The NRA is about guns, and that is what they are focused on. That is where their money and energy is. Unions are about workers' rights. We talked about the Sierra Club's a better example. I'm sorry. The Sierra Club is all about the environment and protecting the American environment, and that's where their money and that's where they lobby. They don't necessarily go into other issues. Political parties deal with everything, the environment, guns, First Amendment, all that stuff. They have a platform. How interest groups influence government. Interest groups use a number of tactics. Disseminate information and persuade Congress, the president, judiciary, the judges, the federal bureaucrats, the girls that actually work in the federal government under the president. So the EPA, the Environmental Protections Agency, the military is a bureaucracy. Okay. So those tactics include the following. Direct lobbying. And direct lobbying is when you have to be a lobbyist, a certified basically lawyer that's been tested to go meet with the congressmen or women and present information to argue on why they want a certain bill or law to or not to pass. That is bad for America. And they'll bring data in, and they're obviously biased. They're acting on the behalf of the group they're lobbying for. However, they could be presenting valid information. They could also be supporting a point of view that the Republican or Democrat already has, or they could sway them one way or another. And also they can give money directly to their campaigns legally. They can give money to their campaigns that's documented. And this is legal. Some people say, oh, it's like legal bribery. In a way, it kind of is, except it's completely documented and the money doesn't go directly into the person's pocket. Like, you can't give them $50, or you can't redo their kitchen, which has happened. There's been congressmen and women arrested because they had their house redid, or they bought another house, or they sold their house for more money than it's worth to somebody that knew somebody, and that's how they get in trouble. That's not legal. Testify before Congress. Amicus curiae. We've talked about this. Its interest groups provide expert witnesses, a friend of the court committing hearings. Remember we talked about amicus curiae, which is this friend of the court. They can provide people. They'll pay for things that cost money, like an expert environmentalist to get up there and testify for the Sierra Nevada Club to protect the mountains or stop the pipeline in North Dakota and across the Great Plains in America. And they'll pay for all that to stop the laws. And they get President Biden, to not build that pipeline, which it did happen. Socializing. They can move around. They can talk, interact with people in politics. Political donations. They can raise money to donate, or they can donate directly to the parties, or they can create PACs, political action committees. They can endorse. It's a big, if you're a Democrat, you have to get the NAACP's endorsement to win in most cases. Otherwise, you're in trouble, because African Americans are one of the strongest groups in the Democratic Party, and you're in trouble. If you can't get the black community behind you, how are you going to win to be the Democratic leader? Court action. They could sue. They could take somebody to court. They could say a law is unconstitutional. We say, well, how could unconstitutional things happen? Well, they do, but if nobody takes them to court or challenges somebody that's doing something against the Constitution, why would it ever change? Rally the membership. They're good at getting their people involved. They can do phone calls. You think like a union, they'll do phone bank calls where they'll call, hey, this is, Jeff from the National Education Association. We got to get out the vote. Can you come out and vote on November 16th or the first Tuesday in November? Because we got November 3rd. We got to win this election. Please support Joe Biden because Joe Biden is pro-union. Stuff like that. They can make videos. They can make propaganda. They could release videos and advertisements promoting their view. They can pay for all that stuff. And it's separate from giving it directly to a politician, so it's allowed. And here's another question. An interest group is most likely to have influence in Congress when the issue at stake, A, is narrow in scope and low in public visibility. B, is part of the president's legislative package. C, has been dramatized by the media. D, engages legislators' deeply held convictions. Or E, divides legislators along party lines. Take a second to process. And I hope you said A. If it's narrow in scope and low in public visibility. So a lot of what happens in government, nobody's even paying attention to. So people say, oh, the media, they just drive government politicians nuts. Maybe they don't drive them nuts enough. I mean, they're constantly passing laws that change the country for the better or the worse based on your opinion, and there will be consequences. So if nobody's paying attention to a tax cut for a $1 billion oil company so that they can drill in parts of Alaska, they might be able to slide that through, lobby and get that through pretty quickly. Or if it's the opposite, if it's a big issue and there's a lot of interest, then a bunch of interest groups will come out and push and fight against it. Like the pipeline. There was a lot of groups, the Indigenous American groups brought a lot of it, said, hey, we don't want this across our lands. We don't want giant oil pipelines that can burst and shoot and pollute our lands. And that's not a very powerful interest group. But then the Sierra Nevada Club and these environmental groups showed up and backed them. Then they became a lot more powerful. So how can interest groups influence? So we have what's called this theory of pluralism. I do not want you to confuse this with plurality. Okay? A pluralism theory is that democracy can be achieved through competition among multiple organization groups, and individuals can participate in politics through group membership and elections. So if you're believing in the pluralistic or pluralism theory, plural just means many, that all these groups are pushing on the government, okay? It's not just one. It's not always about bad or good, but you, unfortunately, in a pluralistic system, are going to have to play the game. You could simply vote and do your duty, or you could be more activist-oriented and you could raise other people's voices to get involved, or you could be members of interest groups. You could own a company that creates an interest group, or you could join an interest group that already exists. But all these groups are pushing on the government on everything. Like everything they do, people say, oh, the government's terrible. Well, if you're looking for a million things to be wrong, you're going to find it. And people are. They're constantly picking apart everything the government does, and we see the consequences in real world. It doesn't affect one or two people. When the federal government makes a decision, it could affect all of us. So they're pushing. You've got people who are pro-life, pro-choice. They're pro-union. They're against guns. They're for guns. They are against rap music. They're against country music. They want more restrictions on movies. You've got people that want more freedom of speech. You got all of this stuff is pushing on the government. And that's why if you buy into James Madison's argument, he says in Federalist 10, well, that's why you need a representative. You need a republic. Representatives will make the best decision in the end. At least enough of them will to keep us safe. But this is constantly going on, and a lot of people would probably argue that maybe money and these interest groups are more powerful than, and if you get the wrong people representing us, they're just going to go the way of where the money or support comes. Maybe to support them or their party. But some of it could just be supporting their own bias anyway, right? Coalition building. Now, this is how you really win. It's the process in which parties, individual organizations, or nations, not political parties, come together to form a coalition. So coalition building in pluralism theory is, as you can see, it's this idea that, okay, all the pro-choice organizations need to work together. But do the pro-choice organizations have anything in common with the women's organizations? Okay, they do. So if we work together on this topic together, we broaden the number of people that are pushing on the government, and they're not going to vote for politicians that vote against their point of view. And we could use our money to make better commercials and lobby people. So you can see on the bottom, you got the pluralist theories, the mainstream media and the community and social movements really push on the power of the government. An elitist system, the power, the community is kind of at the bottom, and these social motivation movements aren't really effective at all. It's almost all through the media, the mainstream media that has all this power and the money and the lobbying. So which of the following is true about amicus curiae briefs? A, they are used by interest groups to lobby courts. B, they are used exclusively by liberal interest groups. C, they are used exclusively by conservative interest groups. D, they are now unconstitutional. Or E, they are the means by which a legitimate seeks Supreme Court review of a lower court decision. Litigate. I'm sorry, I'm losing it. Litigate. Okay? Yep. Okay. Oh, we did that one. Sorry, I skipped ahead. Okay, and I hope you guys said A. They're used by interest groups to lobby courts. So amicus curiae, remember, it's a friend of the court. It is an expert, usually in the field. They push somebody. The lobbyists pay for somebody to advise the court to testify for a company or a group or an organization. So finally, we're going to talk about the last really important part of interest groups is they're part of the iron triangle. And the iron triangle is very important. The iron triangle is this trade interaction between Congress, interest groups, and bureaucracies. And it's called the iron triangle because you can't break it. It's strong like iron. This triangle has been going on for quite a while. And I like these diagrams. So you can see the interest groups can push on Congress. You see this? For electoral support. They're saying, look to Congress. If you want to get elected, you have to, let's do a business group. Let's do tax cuts for corporations. And these companies are saying, look, our interest groups we will give money to your campaign. We will help get you elected if you give a tax cut. And they say they're hitting the Republicans, which they did. And you give us a corporate tax cut. It'll be so much better for America, and the people will be able to hire so many more people. And if you do this, though, you're going to have to change the laws so that the federal bureaucracies they stop regulating us so much. Okay, so then they elect Republicans, which happened, And the Republicans make laws to let go of some regulations and to cut taxes for corporations. So it becomes easier for companies to make much more money, and they don't have to sit there and worry about things like all this pollution, or they don't have to worry about minimum wage going up this year. So they can pay lower wages. So they're like, and they can use the money they want. And then the bureaucracy doesn't regulate as much. Does that make sense? And then the bureaucracy, by not regulating, gives special favors to the interest groups. By not regulating, it gives it what the interest groups wanted. Another good example would be like an interest group with the military. An interest group will lobby Congress to get a military contract. Okay? Think about how expensive military equipment is. It's enormously expensive. But let's do the contract of Boeing. We have Boeing right down the street. They're now building F-15s again. They're going to build several F-15s, which are these extremely multi-billion-dollar planes. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars worth of planes. And we're talking 100 planes is billions and billions of dollars. You could feed America, essentially, if we buy these jet planes. Okay, so Boeing lobbies, which they do. They have a huge lobbying company in D.C., and their lobbyists push, and their interest groups, they push, these corporations push with their groups to get Congress to buy more planes. And this will benefit the bureaucracy, which is the Air Force and the military. They'll get more planes out of it, but they need Congress to spend more money and give the money to the bureaucracies to buy the planes. And by buying the planes, then they get to go back to the companies themselves and actually buy the plane. And it's this unbreakable triangle. It's just how things are working. And you can see the interest groups. Tobacco companies are big groups that fight. I mean, think about it. Tobacco companies, they're finally starting to lose, but for years and years, tobacco and oil ran this country. They so much power. They made so much deregulations. I mean, people didn't even know smoking was officially bad for you until the last 30 years. People really, there was nothing ever official. It says and it takes 10 minutes if you sit next to somebody that smokes cigarettes to realize it's bad for them. I mean, they're coughing. It smells bad. Everything turns yellow. Your fingers turn yellow. People's teeth are yellow. There's no way you would think logically anybody would believe it's not bad for you. But people do have some trust, too. They're like, well, why wouldn't the government or doctors officially say this? Well, they didn't because the cigarette companies pushed on Congress and the government and showed them a lot of misinformation about, oh, no, smoking's not as bad as you think. Millions and millions of people are dead later. Okay, so I want you to look at this one about the Iron Triangle. The advantage of bureaucrats and the federal government have over the president in policy is making processes is that bureaucrats, usually have a continuity of services in the executive branch that the president lacks. That's an interesting point. Meaning continuity means that the bureaucracies still go, right? Even if the mayor is fired tomorrow, I'm still going to be a teacher in St. Louis Public School, which is a bureaucracy. We still have to have St. Louis Public School. Even if Donald Trump's not president tomorrow or Joe Biden's not president tomorrow, there's still going to be an environmental protections agency, okay? So whether you cut back or add to it might change, but they want to keep interacting with those bureaucracies. B, find it easier to gain public support than the president? Is it easier for bureaucracies to get more support than the president itself? C, control the budgetary process. Do they have control over the budget and how much is spent in government? Or D, have oversight responsibility for your bureaucratic policy. And I hope you guys chose A, and I think you saw that I obviously talked about the continuity of services. So if I were to push on Congress, I want to change things in the bureaucracies because the presidents do change. They come and go. But the bureaucracy is always there. Congress could change too, but the bureaucracy is always there. Military is always going to need or not need jets. So if I'm Boeing, I have to keep working on whatever congressmen or women I have to get them to buy jets. President might not want jets. And in which process, and another one, in the process of structure of public policymaking, Iron Triangle refers to A, bargaining and negotiating process between the president and Congress about the direction of domestic policy. B, dominance of corporate power and settling the national policy agenda for economic expansion. C. Interrelationship among federal, state, and local levels of government in the policy process. D. Networks of congressional committees, bureaucratic agencies, and interest groups that strongly influence the policy process. Or E. Groups of presidential advisors who formulate the president's foreign policy agenda. Okay? I hope you guys chose D. Networks of congressional committees, bureaucratic agencies, and interest groups that strongly influence the policy procedure. So remember, Congress committees are pushed on by the interest groups who create bills that they pass to regulate or deregulate the bureaucracies. So they buy in, and they also buy things based on what the laws are. So, or if they get more budget, they get more money to buy more jets, then the Air Force gets more jets, then they go back to the companies that give money to the interest groups, so they get those jets. And it's just an indestructible triangle, the iron triangle.